Time to light the match for the burning truth with Casey Hendrickson.
Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to The Burning Truth. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. Do you want to thank R&B Car Company? Locations in South Bend, Warsaw, and Fort Wayne. Go to rbcarcompany.com. Let them know I sent you. Well, I'm going to say something slightly controversial today. I know you're not used to that, so it may come as a shock for many of you. But I don't exactly apologize for it. Now, if you're watching the live stream and you saw the thumbnail on it, you're probably like, oh, okay, what's this going to be about? This is going to be interesting. This is related to the KKK stuff that's been happening in Granger, Indiana. No, I don't really care about that. I know that there are obviously a lot of people, up in arms and super butthurtery about it, but, it is what it is. But the Lake and Riley thing came down today. And this is, well, I guess on one hand, I'm glad that there was a conviction. On the other hand, I'm a bit miffed. Frankly, there's been a lot of cases lately that I have been miffed about because the sentencing has been extremely light for people who are subhuman. Some might even call them animals. But I hear that if you call them animals, like Trump has called some of these people animals, like apparently it's a racist thing to call somebody who murders and butchers somebody an animal. It's an interesting position for you leftists to take, by the way. So I'm going to start with Doug P. over at Twitchy. Lake and Riley and other victims deserve more justice and accountability than today's guilty verdict. I agree with that. So an illegal alien who came to this country is just put on trial for the death, the murder of Lake and Riley in Georgia. He's been found guilty of all 10 charges, which again is good. Took the jury like no time at all. There are many layers of maddening aspects to this story. We'll start with the reports that a Soros-backed DA will not seek the death penalty for Riley's murderer. While we're on the subject of accountability, justice is far from being served for Riley and many, many others. Now, some people have asked a very simple question. What about the people who let him into the country? What about the people who let him go after he was detained? All good questions. So Twitchy continues. It all started well before Joe Biden was even in the White House when during a Dem debate, he urged people to surge to the border if he were to end up in the Oval Office. Something that the news media likes to tell you didn't actually happen, except there's this whole thing called video where you can see him saying it. We all know what happened next. People flowed illegally into the U.S. by the millions and the millions. The one network on major cable news who actually went down to the border, camped out at the border, spent time at the border, and interviewed people coming across the border, that was Fox. They routinely spoke to illegal immigrants crossing that border illegally who said, Joe Biden told us to come, because he did. Biden wouldn't even stop trying to appease the pro-open borders leftists after he referred to Lake and Riley's killer as an illegal during a State of the Union speech, which he was, by the way, forced to do. He got her name wrong also. I mean, I don't think that should be ignored. He got her name wrong. He was forced into acknowledging her by Republicans in that chamber. But then he did. He referred to the killer as an illegal. And of course, he had to backpedal on that and had to apologize for that because how dare he call this guy an illegal? But he was one. Twitchy then writes, true justice won't happen until all of the people responsible for horrors like what happened to Lake and Riley and so many other victims were held accountable. So Bill Malugin said the government failed Lake and Riley at every step of the way. Her killer was in federal custody after crossing the border illegally, then released. Now, this is something that the news media loves to ignore, by the way. They like to conflate, they like to project, they like to do all of these things. But he illegally crossed into the country. He was detained. He was then let go. He was released again in Sanctuary City, New York City, after he was arrested. ICE had not been notified. Then New York City gave him taxpayer-funded flights to Georgia. This is unacceptable at every single level. Now, sane people know that. The truth is this, folks, and this is the sad part of it, is that Laken Riley would still be alive today if Joe Biden hadn't changed Donald Trump's border policies. That's the truth. That's the simple, plain, honest truth. And that truth is the same for thousands of other Americans who are not with us today because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's border policies. Period. End of story. So when I see Tom Homan doing what Tom Homan does, and Tom Homan goes out there and says, "Yeah, I'm sending you out of the country," and he does it in the traditional Tom Homan, I don't really care what you think manner that he has employed throughout his nearly 40-year career. Yeah, people like me cheer. Guess what? A majority of the country cheers when they hear that. That's another thing that the news media doesn't want you to know, is that a majority of Americans support mass deportations right now. You realize that we have never been to that point ever in our polling? Ever. Ever. A majority of Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, support mass deportation. Meaning most Americans, the norm, wants people rounded up, and they want people sent out of our borders, and then the borders sealed up so they can't get back in. Nick Williams writes that Mayorkas and the New York City officials responsible for this should be charged in her death, too. I mean, they won't be. I don't think they legally can be. But wouldn't that be something? As an aside, do you find it at all ironic, we'll just say ironic, that the same people who are telling you, including Mayorkas and these officials in New York City, and anybody who is defending them at all, in this case or in other cases, do you find it at all ironic that those are the people who think that Glock should be held responsible when somebody uses a product that they make in a crime, and yet they don't think that these officials should be held responsible when their policies cause a crime? You find that at all interesting? I thought the whole thing was, no. You created the scenario which allowed this to happen, whether you intended it or not. Therefore, you must be held liable, Mr. Firearms Company. It's funny how they never want to be held liable for their policies causing the death of people. I take this very personally because I have people very close to me who are killed by illegal immigrants. This pisses me off. It's bad enough what happened to her was heinous, but it pisses me off. You may not want to realize this, you may not want to accept this, but the American taxpayer funded her death, her murder, the torture that she endured by this, animal. So now that the case is won, I certainly hope that her family goes on the warpath and they sue everybody, because everybody deserves to take a big old bite of the poo sandwich that's coming their way. This is despicable. But Laken Riley is one person in a list of thousands that had the same thing happen. 12-year-old girl not that long ago, raped by multiple men, illegal aliens. Many of them, of course, tied to the same gang that comes from Venezuela that Joe Biden let in. A gang that is now in every single major city in the state of Tennessee. You know, the same gang that was taking over apartment buildings in Colorado that the media, the news media that you're supposed to trust because they're arbiters of truth, right? They're the gatekeepers of fact and fiction, they tell you. And they told you it wasn't happening. Remember that? They told you it wasn't happening. It was literally a figment of the imagination of everybody saying that it was going on, including the governor of the state of Colorado. He said it too. And as the governor had issued that statement, that this is a figment of people's imagination, including local lawmakers, figment of her imagination, I had to ask one simple question, and Morgan was here when we asked that question. If it's a figment of their imagination, why are you mobilizing the National Guard and sending them there to Boulder, Colorado? What does the National Guard need to go to Boulder, Colorado to deal with a figment of imagination for? Then you get people like Dana Bash in the news media again, because you don't hate them enough, by the way, going out there and going, it's just a couple of apartment buildings. And J.D. Vance rightly going, do you even hear yourself? But it's all over Texas. It's not Colorado. It's Texas. Every report came out just a couple of days ago. That same Venezuelan gang is now in every major city in Tennessee. Anybody want to take bets on how they arrived in Tennessee? Was it a taxpayer-funded flight from the Biden administration? Anybody? I'll bet if we dug for 5 minutes or so, we'd probably find out that was probably the case. Red state, Tennessee, all of a sudden's got a Venezuelan gang there. Yeah, that sounds about right. So the prosecution is not going to seek the death penalty here. Okay. So this is where my controversial statement comes up. Laken Riley was white. Her murderer was not. I'm okay with loading up the commissary for the Aryan prison gang in the prison that this guy gets sent to. I'm okay with that. I have no apologies about that at all. Now, I probably can't put a note attached to it. I'm sure they're going to be wondering like why there's some radio host in Indiana loading up the entire prison gang with, chips and salsa and whatnot. I don't think they would appreciate the little note. Like, hey, this guy, just so you know. Am I that lucky? Probably not. Am I going to be happy if a prison gang takes care of this dude and I have to come on the show and crack the microphone one day and let you know that, hey, some people I bought chips for took care of a problem? Yeah, I got no problem with that. Now watch every single liberal who's listening to this program right now going, oh my God, I can't believe he just advocated murder for this guy. One, I sell kill pedophile t-shirts and make no apologies about it. And two, I would probably be wary of those people being in your inner circle. Because if they're really that upset about it, if they're really that upset that I'm okay with a prison gang taking out somebody who murdered an innocent nursing student, if they're really that upset, my guess is they're probably not good people. Observe how people behave around that type of stuff. So if anybody knows, well, I guess we got to find out which facility he's going to be going to long term, right, Morgan? So if anybody, we'll put out, I don't know, ads in the newspaper or something like that. Hey, do you know anybody who's a member of the Aryan prison gang of this prison? Get in touch with us. What are some of the snacks that they like? We'll load them up in the commissary. Got more coming up. You're tuned into The Burning Truth. Strange bedfellows, folks. Epic Games. They make Fortnite and a bunch of other super, super popular games. They're one of the biggest gaming companies in the world. And so Epic Games' CEO, Tim Sweeney, has said something pretty interesting. Something I honestly didn't really expect, but Tim Sweeney is the CEO of Epic Games, the company behind one of the world's most popular games, Fortnite, has been vocal in his support for the principles that Brendan Carr, President-elect Trump's new chair for the Federal Communications Commission, stands for, particularly regarding free speech and the fight against excessive control by tech monopolies. Now, there has been some interesting battles with Epic Games and certain elements of big tech, particularly Apple and Google. But at the same time, it's like Epic Games is not exactly a conservative-minded company. So it's a little interesting that they're taking this stance. In a series of tweets, Sweeney emphasized the chilling effects of gatekeeper censorship and lauded the actions that counter such restrictive measures, indirectly aligning his views with those championed by Carr. On Sunday, Carr, currently the senior Republican member of the FCC and a nominee, President-elect Trump from 2017, was designated as the next chairman of the FCC, which, by the way, is overall a pretty good thing. A lot of his takes are very, very good. Others, To take office in January is when he's going to be over the chairman. So this all happened with the changeover. So Trump lauded Carr's extensive service in a statement, pointing out that Carr had been unanimously confirmed by the Senate 3 times, and his term would extend until 2029. The president-elect expressed his confidence in Carr's leadership, stating that his current term runs through 2029, and because of his great work, I will now be designating him as permanent chairman. So Tim Sweeney expressed his concerns about large tech companies like Apple and Google. And again, Epic Games has had battles with them for some time and have threatened to block apps like X from their platforms. They've engaged in what he describes as purges of privacy apps in certain countries, which is 100% true. That's absolutely happening. Gatekeeper censorship and chilling of speech is very real. Apple tried to silence me and ban my company, Epic Games, from competing with Apple under Europe's Digital Markets Act on account of my speech criticizing Apple and their practices, he wrote. American freedom of speech will exist in name only if private monopolies have free rein to censor or shadow ban the opinions of Americans that they dislike or disagree with. And, it's been very interesting. So he wrote this on November 17th. I don't know how active Tim Sweeney was before the election, but sure would have been nice if people like that were much more front and center before the election on this type of stuff, because it's critical for what's happening in the country. But I've had so many people over the past week being like, man, I can't find you on Facebook anymore. Yeah, no kidding. It's been a long time, hasn't it? Just pay attention more. Just throwing it out there. I'm not telling you to get off of Facebook. I'm just telling you that if you're interested in news and politics and that type of content, you ain't going to get good stuff on Facebook. That's for sure. You can follow me on other social networks at Casey the Host. We got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth.
The Burning Truth with Casey Hendrickson.
Well, the Democrats are rushing to get everything through that they can. Biden's trying to get appointments through, which, again, this goes back to the old Obama argument when he's trying to do those appointments at the end of his term. Now, technically, does he have the authority to make those nominations? Yeah, he does. But it's an ahistoric abnormality. It's generally seen as, once the election is over and I'm out, making an appointment is not the right call. It's for the next administration to do. Obama tried to get around that. Republicans fought it. The news media pitched a fit, and they're like, they're blocking his appointments and everything. Well, now Joe Biden's trying to do that thing. But it was being blocked because, listen, you're trying to rush a bunch of stuff through before you leave, but the American people have spoken. They want a changeover in government. They want things to be handled differently. And historically in the United States, you don't grant those appointments when you have a lame duck president who's getting ready to leave office. It's just not how it works, okay? So we'll get into some of that stuff a little bit later, but the Michigan Democrats are still doing the same thing. Remember, they tried to push through this concealed carry ban on most properties, most public places, and then they said it was an accident, it was a mistake, we totally messed up, sorry. Well, Michigan Democrats also passed a couple of bills that give trans people in the state pretty much exclusive legal privileges when it comes to accusing others of violence, which is interesting. So the Michigan House Democrats passed 2 bills last week that would carve out exclusive protections against so-called hate crimes for individuals based on certain categories like sexual orientation, gender identity, and religion, among others. So lawmakers voted to pass such provisions despite current laws already in place to protect citizens from threats, harm, and intimidation. Now, those are in place at the federal level and, of course, at the state level. So the Democrats in the State House in Michigan passed HB 5400 and HB 5401. The first bill would, according to a legislative analysis, amend the Michigan Penal Code to revise its hate crimes provisions, in part by adding sexual orientation and gender identity or expression, among other things, to its list of protected attributes. So the second bill would then amend the sentencing guidelines to include the new felonies proposed by HB 5400. HB 5400, as passed by the House, removes the qualifier of physical contact from its description of possible hate crimes, replacing it with the use of force or violence against another individual because of his inclusion in a protected class. But you've now removed the qualifier for physical. Now, why is that important? Well, do they or do they not tell you that words are violence now? So, look, there's hate crimes, and then there's just being mean to people. You know, a hate crime is when you assault and physically harm somebody because of those attributes. If you just say mean things to them, sticks and stones and all of that stuff that they used to teach kids. Causing bodily injury, stalking, causing property damage, or threatening to do so based in whole or in part on one of the protected characteristics also qualifies as a hate crime under the bill. Okay, so property damage, stalking, or threatening is now a hate crime. HB 5401 prescribes sentences ranging between 2 and 10 years in prison, depending on the supposed offense. Now, mark my words, this will come back to bite them, because there's a lot of people who are attacked because they're straight, and this can then be applied to them as long as you have a legal system that's willing to equally apply the law. Right now, they don't have that in Michigan, but it's getting there. One day, it will be there. Michigan law already bans physical assault and threats or intimidation across the board. So this just creates a whole new category, even though it's already illegal. The 14th Amendment already ensures the government provides all citizens with the equal protection of the laws. Acts or threats of violence against individuals or groups are also not protected under the First Amendment. Of course, we're talking about actual credible threats. I think the goal here was to not make them credible, but I digress. Both bills are sponsored by Democrat State Representative Noah Arbit and Christian Grant. The bill narrowly passed the House 57-52, with one Republican joining all Democrats in approving the legislation. Democrats have a narrow majority in the State House, controlling 56 seats to Republicans' 54. Now that's changing over, but Republican State Senator Jim Rudenstad told the Federalist that Democrat-controlled Senate will likely pass the bills in December during its final weeks of session. So now you have the possibility here of a person being prosecuted under this bill, that they might actually be able to convince a court that they're innocent because they were unaware of the actions that could be seen as threatening violence, or which again is a caveat that HB 5400 supposedly carves out. Runestad also expressed concern that prosecutors could then tack on these hate crime charges to other offenses, which could increase the penalties. Now, again, that's what the other side wanted. They wanted additional penalties because if the victim is trans, they're more of a victim than if they weren't trans, even if you did the exact same thing. There are certain people that are just more a victim than others, according to the left. You could have a confrontation with somebody and then use the wrong pronoun and thus get it escalated from a regular crime into a hate crime with additional penalties. Now, that never goes the other way, by the way. Ever. Now, if you have a decent legal system and some good lawyers, they can make that argument, but it just generally doesn't happen, which is why it's always news when it does go that way. Runestad also voiced concern that while the charges may not always hold up in court, prosecutors could still politically weaponize the charges, bankrupting the finances and reputations of the accused, even if they're ultimately found to be innocent. Quote, Now that you've done to the other person who's been charged, now what you've done to the other person who's been charged or had this allegation thrown at them, you oftentimes destroy them because the media will pick that up all day long, and it breaks you, it destroys you, you go bankrupt. Right. And oftentimes, by the way, people take a plea deal because they just run out of cash. They run out of cash, they run out of a way to fight. The lawyer's like, well, we're out, you can't pay your bill, we're not going to help you anymore, so you better take this plea. And a lot of people do. Republican State Representative Matt Hall, who will serve as the House Speaker when Republicans gain control, because they did win this election, suggested on X before the bills were passed that prosecutors could potentially use these bills to target people for saying that there are only two sexes online. And yes, exactly. Remember when they said it was just gender, it wasn't sex, no, sex and gender were different, now they're conflating, and we told you they were going to. Told you they were going to conflate them, and that's exactly what they're doing now. After losing majority, House Democrats want to ram through woke bills to allow prosecutors to go after people for stating that there are only two genders on social media. Michiganders don't want this. This is absurd, radical, it's out of touch. Arbit told the Federalist that also before the bills passed the State House last week, that they would not criminalize misgendering. He also said that the bills would not affect the right of free speech protected under the First Amendment, and that they only apply to violent acts. But then again, you remove the qualifier of physical contact. Words are violence, remember? See, you have to listen to how they say things. This is why I've told you for 20 plus years. Listen to how they say things. If words are violence and you remove the qualifier of physical contact from the existing law as you pass these two new bills making a new law, words are violence, you've removed the qualifier of physical contact, and then you say it will only apply to violent acts, but you've just told me that physical contact is no longer required and that words are violence, that would mean that, yes, theoretically, technically, you could absolutely say that words are violence and therefore apply this law to people who say things that hurt people's feelings. He also indicated that he sponsored the proposed legislation in response to anti-Semitic violence following October 7 terror attacks against Israel. So that's the attempt to appease to the masses. This isn't about the gender stuff. This is about anti-Semitism. Everybody, hates anti-Semitism, right? So that's the appeal to masses thing. Michigan has had a hate crime law for over 35 years, since 1988 on the books. So this isn't a new law. It's just updating it to increase the penalties and ensure more groups targeted by hate crimes are covered. Cool. Add conservatives in there. Go ahead, add political violence. You want to add political violence? Of course they don't. Why did you remove the qualifier of physical contact? When asked about safeguards in place to prevent subjective prosecution regarding the provisions, Arbit noted how hate crime prosecutions require proof of motive, which makes the burden of proof higher. Except how many cases have we covered over the years where there is definitive proof of it being a targeted hate crime? And yes, I agree with people on the live stream right now that hate crimes technically don't exist. I agree with you. But for the sake of argument, this is what we have to do. We're not arguing that other thing. It's not relevant to this case. We're arguing this. So we've had cases where you have definitive proof that there is a hate crime, but they won't actually apply it because the victim is white, which is a common thing that happens. But we've also seen where they do get very subjective and they make it a hate crime when there isn't any actual evidence of there being a hate crime, particularly in the news media. The news media does this daily. He also claimed that prosecutors won't charge a hate crime in Michigan without extraordinary compelling evidence to prove guilt. Well, that's not true. That's not true at all. This has come up in Michigan and other states many, many times. Folks, you have the attorney general of the state who engages in hate crimes on a regular basis against her political opponents. So, again, Republicans will get back the state house, but that doesn't happen until next year. So they're doing everything they can to ram these things through last minute. They got caught with the concealed carry stuff, which we talked about last week. They were so embarrassed by that they actually had to change the law. But this one they got through. So it's expected to pass the Senate with relative ease and then go to Gretchen Whitmer's desk where she will sign it because, of course, Gretchen Whitmer is most likely a man. Got more coming up. You're tuned into The Burning Truth. Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to The Burning Truth. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. Want to thank R&B Car Company, locations in South Bend, Warsaw, and Fort Wayne. Go to rbcarcompany.com. Margot Cleveland, Republicans must defend Matt Gaetz to end the use of salacious lies as a political weapon. Yeah, I agree. Before marrying in 2021, former Representative Matt Gaetz, he's former because he resigned, Republican of Florida, was known to be a braggadocious libertine. He was. No conservative wants to defend such behavior, and so many on the right are remaining silent as Gaetz is accused of also engaging in criminal conduct, paying prostitutes, and having sex with a minor. The claims against Gaetz are but another information operation, however, mirroring the ones that previously targeted Donald Trump and Brett Kavanaugh, and every other prominent Republican anywhere, by the way. This pattern will continue unabated unless Americans unflinchingly condemn the tactic, no matter the target. We should have learned this lesson from Donald Trump's first presidential run and time in office, from Crossfire Hurricane to the P-tape dossier to special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Unsupported and unbelievable accusations leaked to the public hampered Trump's ability to advance his agenda time and again. The charges proved unfounded, and yet, in advance of the 2024 election, the lawfare continued. The country, however, had wised up by then and recognized that various criminal and civil charges leveled against Trump for what they were, an effort to interfere in the election. Why, then, is anyone giving credence to the accusations against Gaetz, especially given the FBI, after thoroughly investigating the matter for 2 years, decided not to charge him? Rather, career prosecutors for the Department of Justice concluded that there were credibility problems with the two central witnesses in the case, which I went over in great detail at the beginning of the week, did I not, Morgan? That was Monday. You're welcome. Especially the primary witness, who has made this exact same accusation against numerous political rivals and has admitted to fabricating them against others as well. Pretty important detail that's getting left out of all of this. Cue my audio, please. Here's The View's Sunny Hostin. Now, this is a compare and contrast. Sunny Hostin, and then 3 minutes later, after they came back from a commercial break, about Matt Gaetz. Listen to this.
How could you nominate someone with allegations of child trafficking trafficking across state lines and having sex with a 17-year-old? My understanding further on in the interview, they discussed the fact that once he finds out that she's 17, he stops having sex with her.
Sonny,
you 3 minutes later.
I do have a legal note. Thank you, Whoopi.
Oh, she looks so mad.
Matt Gaetz has long denied all allegations, calling the claims, quote, invented, and saying in a statement to ABC News that this false smear following a 3-year criminal investigation should be viewed with great skepticism. That DOJ investigation was closed with no charges being brought.
Ha ha. Ha ha. Ha ha. So she goes out there, she says a bunch of crap that is, frankly, stupid. And then, honestly, shockingly, I'm surprised that the production staff was like, no, Sunny Hostin, you need to go back. You need to clarify this. Like, you just accused Matt Gaetz of doing a bunch of stuff. That is probably not true. Probably not wise. Matt Gaetz, by the way, reposting this stuff has been really funny. He's just like putting like eyeball emojis. You need to watch this video in the Daily Show Prep when I posted at btmedia.news after the show today. Watch this video of her having to offer a clarification of the bogus stuff that she said, because she sits there, looks like she is a captive hostage being forced at gunpoint to read a statement. And there's even a deep swallow that happens right before she utters her first word. It's honestly must-see TV. which is never, ever going to happen on The View, but it happened today. And I would encourage you to enjoy it and watch it. It'll be at btmedia.news. I've also reposted it on my X at Casey the Host. You can go subscribe and follow me there. We got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth.
Podcasts by Federated Media.